was 17 years old when I realized that gender and sex were two different things. Hello everyone and welcome back to Shelf Life. This is Simran and this is your favorite podcast, Shelf Life, where we talk about books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with a book. And I am so glad to have you guys back for another week. It's been a pretty hectic week, but it's been nice. I've enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have had a great week too. What else has been going on? It's been raining a lot again, which is new, which, there were a lot of sunny days in the middle, which was great, but it's been raining a lot, and that comes with its own problems. But yeah, the whole gloomy weather, the whole thing, made me really think about, what book I want to do this week and what really fit the mood, considering the fact that recently I've started to read a lot of non-fiction, like I said, mostly for academic purposes. I've started to read a lot of academic writing, which is fun to some extent, but it can get a little bit heavy. I mean, it can get really heavy for sure. You get to read and you get to hear a lot of things that you probably wouldn't have access to otherwise. But yeah, it can get a little heavy, and I was trying to find a lighter read, so to say, in the academic space and in the non-fiction genre. And I don't really like to, read a lot of autobiographies or anything. I don't know. It's just not my cup of tea. So I tried to find something that I would like, and I also tried to find something that I could talk about on the podcast. And I realized that a while ago I read Bad Feminist, and that's when it struck me, oh my god, this is absolutely the book that I should be talking about. It's just perfect. It's not as heavy as other really pessimistic literature that exists out there. It's not very heavy, but it is extremely impactful, and it can be funny at times. It can be absolutely hilarious, and it can also be really thought-provoking. So I want to talk about Bad Feminist today, and in general I think I want to talk about a lot of other things that a lot of other themes that might be related to this topic. And Bad Feminist is something that I picked up, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. It was I remember the time as well. It was after I'll tell you, it was after the Women's March that happened in 2017, when we all know what happened then. Donald Trump became president, and there was so much uproar. And I remember, I think I read a lot of these quotes that kept popping up on Instagram and all of these other sites about how, there were a lot of people who took Roxanne Gay, who's the author of the book, that took her words, that took quotes from the book to protest. And there is absolutely nothing that I like more than when people take quotes from books or from songs to protest. I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciate that. I, for one, have always done that. Any protest I've ever been to, I have taken either a quote from a song that I liked, or from some book that I'd read, or something that some author or some important person had said, because I really appreciate that. And anytime I see that, when I see someone else bring a placard that has a quote, I'm like, yes, I see you and I appreciate you. And, if I have to give an example, like the last protest I went to, I took a placard that had Pink Floyd's lyrics. It had, if you've heard the song Mother by any chance, it has that line, that really beautiful line. It says, "Mother, should I trust the government?" And I took that, and there were a lot of people who didn't get it, but there were a lot who did. So I am very, very thankful for that. But anyway, coming back to our topic, right? Bad Feminist is a collection of essays that essentially don't really talk about what it means to be a feminist. I think the whole purpose of the book is that there is no definition, there is no static rigid rule or definition for what it means to be a feminist. The rules change, the definitions change, the meaning itself changes, and it has changed. It has evolved throughout history, right? I mean, the feminist movement started as a response to women demanding their right to vote. But of course, once that was achieved, there were a lot of other things that women demanded, and rightfully so. They needed that space in society. And at the core of any feminist movement at any given time in history has been that women demanding to be heard and to be seen, and for their voices to be heard, for their place in society. And that's what it is. And a lot of times people try to argue that, oh, they already have a place in society, they already have a voice, why do you need anything more? But that's not it. We need more voices to be heard, we need more stories to be heard. And that is the purpose of books like Bad Feminist. They're trying to tell you that there is no one way to do this, there is no one path to follow. There can't be. It's not achievable. It's not going to happen. But you just have to accept that there is purpose in multiplicity. There is something that can be achieved, that should be achieved through multiplicity, through diversity, and it is admirable. So that's getting into the premise of Bad Feminist, right? And of course, Roxanne Gay talks about a bunch of different issues. And she references a lot of other books written by a lot of other women. And that I found was very interesting. I've never really read a female writer, reviewing or examining something that other women had written. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that women don't discuss other women's writings or their work. Of course they do, but the perception is usually that they're trying to bring them down, or they're trying to undermine it, or something like that, right? But in Bad Feminist, Roxanne Gay doesn't try to do that. She's just examining literature that is already out there, that she looks at a certain way, and she's just trying to bring that out, and that made a lot of sense. I mean, one of those books that she's talking about here, and it relates back to how I started this episode, right? One of these books that she's talking about is called Gender Trouble, by Judith Butler. And I had the time to actually go through that book as well, and because I was so interested in what Judith Butler had to say, that I actually read a little bit of that book, but like while I was reading Bad Feminist, and the stuff that I read there was just so mind-boggling. And before we get into that, before we get into the whole concept of gender and sex and all of these different things, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about I want to share some stories from my personal life too, right? I want to ease you into the topic. I don't want to just pull you in too fast. So let's talk a little bit about gender. Let's just put it out there. I mean, we just talked about feminism. We talked about the feminist movement. We talked about why women need their stories to be heard, why they demand to have a place in society. We talked about that. But what does it mean to be a woman in the first place? How do you define what is man and what is woman? right? And it's a more fundamental question. It's a more deeper question. And I think a lot of feminists themselves, sadly enough, don't address it because it is just so difficult to do. You cannot, there is no one answer to it. Again, I'm reiterating that because before we get into any kind of discussion about anything, honestly, we need to understand that there is no one answer. There will never be about anything. You can say that, oh, this has been proven by time and by experiments, by research, by science, by God, by whatever you want to call it, right? But there is still no one answer, and there will never be. But moving on from that, let's talk a little bit about the whole gender thing and how it affects everybody differently, how we come to it, and what does it actually mean? So, considering that, I just wanted to share a little bit about, how I came to the idea of womanhood or femininity in itself in my life, right? So, when I was growing up, it was very clear, as it is for a lot of people, when you're in school, your concept of what it means to be female and how you're supposed to behave, what it means to be male and how you're supposed to behave, all of that is very clear. You are told exactly what to do, right? You are given it on a platter. You're given uniforms, you're given different kind of hairstyles that you're supposed to wear. You have skirts or pants, you have all these obvious differences. But when you go deeper than that, there's also differences in the way that you live, right? The way that you make friends, for instance, the way that you conduct yourself in that environment without supervision too. And that's where conditioning comes into place. And of course, that's going into the psychological aspect of it. And it's been written about so much. And you can do that research. You can definitely do that research on your own. And I'm sure that I'm not probably I don't have enough knowledge about that to be saying anything. But I can just tell you that, that's a much broader topic that you should probably look into. But I'm saying that you do get conditioned to believe certain things when you're a child, and you follow into it, and you just grow into it, sort of, right? Into when you come to adulthood, you carry all those thoughts, you carry all those beliefs, you carry all those just notions that you've already created in your head that have been given to you, and you carry them with you throughout your life. And then maybe some people reach a point where they discard those opinions, where they discard all those beliefs that they had. Maybe they don't. Some people don't, some people do. And that's completely their choice. But what I wanted to talk about is that for me specifically, when I was a kid, I think I was trying to think of, when or how I started to associate with being female. Specifically, and I realized that a lot of it came from my ability or the fact that I was making female friends. So my entire idea of being female came from being surrounded by females, quote unquote females. So I started to think about, when did I start to make female friends? When did I start to make friends? And how did that go? What was that process like? And I realized that making female friends was, of course, it was supposed to be something that you naturally did, by virtue of being like them. And you were supposed to kind of mold yourself into that persona, and you were supposed to fit into that label. And all of you, when you're a child especially, you're all supposed to have similar thoughts. You're supposed to behave in similar ways. Of course, as you grow up, those similar ways change, and you hear a lot of other things, and you grow into different people. But when you're a kid, it's pretty clear cut, right? And I was thinking that the shift that I had from the minute I realized that being female had different meanings, could mean different things, and that it wasn't just a homogenous way of living. The minute I realized that was probably in adolescence, when I, had a friend, and I realized that when that friend wanted to perhaps go and like do manly things like play football or play video games or hang out with the guys or something like that, everyone around me, all of our other friends, female friends, would say something like, oh, but she's not really, what she's doing is wrong. That's not how it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to behave that way. There was a certain sense of condescension, I guess. And I think everybody understands that. Everybody feels that to some extent. And that's when I realized that maybe being female is not a homogenous thing. Maybe there are different types of females. There are different ways of being women. And that was a very eye-opening thing for me. And obviously it's not as traumatic as other people have experiences, but for me it was quite weird to notice. And like I said, I was 17 years old when I realized that gender and sex were two different things. And that's when I realized that, oh, maybe being female is not like something that you're born with or something that is inherently a part of you. Maybe it is something that you choose to be. And that opened up a completely new spectrum of things. That opened up like a new horizon in itself, and I absolutely could not grasp just everything that was thrown at me, and I had to sit down and reconsider everything that I had believed in, at least when it comes to your gender and your identity. And I don't think a lot of people have that experience, because I know that a lot of people probably don't come to that conclusion or realize that gender and sex are two different things. But yeah, I think when you have that realization, when you actually come to it, it can be very liberating. It can be very scary for sure, because it opens up a whole new world that you had never known existed. And it can also be extremely interesting. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. That when did you realize that gender and sex were two different things? How did you meet your gender, the gender that you belong to right now, currently, that you subscribe to? When did you meet that gender? And did you always feel that it was something you were born with? Did you always feel that it is something that, that you were conditioned to believe in? Were you conditioned to behave a certain way? And that's something I want to build on. And before we get into that, let's talk again about Judith Butler and her book, Gender Trouble. And I'm going to just quote a little something that she had written in the book, that is written in Bad Feminist as well. And here's how it goes. Gender ought not to be construed as a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts follow. Rather, gender is an identity tenuously constituted in time, instituted in an exterior space through a stylized repetition of acts. The effect of gender is produced through the stylization of the body, and hence must be understood as the mundane way in which bodily gestures, movements, and styles of various kinds constitute the illusion of an abiding gendered self. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds extremely heavy. There's a lot of words that that don't really sound too good when they're strung together like that. But yeah, apart from all the flowery language and all of that, there's a message there that I think is very powerful. The moment you realize that your gender is something that you choose, or rather, I don't think choose would be the perfect word there. Your gender is something that forms over time, that comes into being over time, and that is, like Judith said, it's situated in you. It is instituted as a part of your identity, and it's not something that is inherently you, but it becomes you over time, and that happens through certain gestures. It happens through conditioning. It happens through you wearing certain uniforms to school, for example, or girls being told to wear plaits to school, right? Or just certain things, that guys being told to keep their hair to a certain length, or to not wear nail paint, or all of these things, right? These are all not constraints, but these are all things that make gender what it is. And that begs the question of, like, how do you gauge what is gender and sex? And what I realized is that what I've learned over time is that sex is something that you're born with, that relates essentially to just your reproductive organ or your all of that. But gender is something that you choose to identify as. And that in itself, that distinction is so important to make, but not a lot of people make it, and not a lot of people come to it. And when you realize that gender can very well just be a performance, right? And Bad Feminist talks at length about this, about the idea that maybe gender is just a performance. Maybe it's just an illusion. Maybe you are doing the things that you do as a woman or as a man because you're told that this is what women or this is what men should do. And everything, and that's when you start thinking, like, that's when I started thinking, for example, that when I read, when Roxanne Gay talked about this concept of gender being performance, that's when I started thinking, like, is everything I do just a reinforcement of the fact that, of my conditioning from my society, of what my gender should do or should be like? And I started thinking, like, why do I paint my nails? Why do I wear certain things? Why do I eat certain way? Or why do I talk a certain way? Why is it, difficult or not difficult to make female friends? And what is the problem with, some girl talking more and hanging out more with guys and not with girls? I mean, all of that, it's such gray area, and it's gray area, but at the same time, it's just everywhere in your life. Like, this is everything that you do. Imagine that, just every single thing that you do. What if all of that was part of your conditioning? Just take any random act that you do. It could be anything. It could be the way that you brush your teeth, or the way that you shop, the way that you order food, the way that you eat, anything. What role does conditioning play in that? And what role does your gender, the gender that you probably chose or didn't choose, or that was instituted in you, what role does that play? So yeah, that leads to a lot of questioning, and I totally understand why a lot of people these days identify as gender fluid, because there is clearly a disconnect between the whole concept of gender. Like, it is possible for gender to be fluid, and maybe gender is fluid because gender in itself is a social construct. It's imaginary. It's constituted by society and by their beliefs and all that. So it is possible for someone to just not subscribe to that. And it's just like there's so many different counter arguments to it that keep coming up. And of course, Bad Feminist talks about all of this. She considers, the biblical argument that God made men and women and he made them a certain way, and it's all written, it's all sacred. But is it really? I mean, is it that difficult to understand that maybe this is all just a result of us living in the place that we live in, with the leaders that we live in, with the government in place? I don't know. It's such a it's such a complicated scenario. It's such a complicated world, and to make sense of it, it takes more than just one one bad feminist by Roxanne Gay. I think it takes a lot more books, a lot more understanding, a lot more conversation, a lot more of just considering and re-examining a lot of things that you do. I mean, for example, I just like coming back to the whole, you know, the effects of these very clear gender roles, and what that does to kids and just the younger generation going into adulthood or growing up. I mean, just the effect that has, the implications that those roles have. And I want to connect it back to female friendships, right? And it's just it's so sad that a lot of people now, and not now, but I mean, when I was in school and everything, it was not, it was not appreciated, or it was not cool enough to have more female friends than male friends. You know, it was cooler to be with the guys in a weird way. I mean, this is when you're like a teenager and stuff, right? So it was always cooler to hang out with guys than with girls. And if you were, it was a very weird thing that it was cooler to say, oh yeah, but I'm not like the girls and I'm not like them. And it was, I don't even know why. It took so much time to actually understand why I did that. And I have done all of this. And it's so interesting to think that so many of us believed that you shouldn't have female friendships in your life because female friendships are just all drama and they're not healthy. Everyone's just fighting. They're very arrogant and there's a lot of issues with it and blah blah blah. All of these things that you hear, right, in television, through books, through jokes, even through songs, and you don't even know if that is true, but it is told to you as the truth, so you believe it, so you keep reinforcing it, you keep living by that. And it takes so much unlearning to say, maybe that is not true, maybe I've been doing this the wrong way. And I am so happy that I've been blessed to have some amazing female friends, and I totally do not accept the fact that they cannot be healthy relationships, that they are just fraught with disagreements and a lot of backbiting and all of these things, because it is just not true. And I think it's the stereotype also goes back because it's been ingrained in us that to be successful as a woman, as a minority, it is imperative that you bring other women down. It's almost as if there is no possibility of there being more than one good feminist out there. It's not possible to be more than one successful woman in any field. And that is just so sad to believe that, to know that is so ingrained in a lot of us. I mean, think about it. Think about if if you work in an office, if you're a musician, if you're an artist, if you work in any space, anywhere, think about your jobs and just think about the CEOs of your company. Think about the people at the higher level. How many of those are women? And think about your executive board. How many of those are women? And of course, there'll be people saying, "Oh yeah, but my CEO is a woman." On the executive board, there's 2 women. That's a win. But is that really a win compared to all the other 8 men that you have there? Probably not, right? It just reinforces the idea that there can't be more than one. That you have to fight it out. You have to fight out other women to reach the top. You can't be friends. And all of these other stupid ideas that you are fed when you're younger, it can be so detrimental. And I know for a fact that it can be detrimental for boys as well, where they don't understand what it means to have female friendships. They don't know what it means to be friends with a girl without having the whole romantic connotation to it, without having the whole friend zone angle or whatever that is. I don't even like to say that word, but yeah, without having all of those just angles to it, what it means to just be friends with a girl. Be respectful, be accommodating, be nice, be normal. You just don't know. Like, for example, this is the most glaring thing that happened to me. That my friend, who is a guy, he does this thing where, him and his guy friends, they get together and they play video games at night or something like that, and they play Scrabble, they play a lot of things, and it's quite fun. They play it late at night, and it's usually just him and his guy friends. But I asked him if it would be okay if I joined in, and he said of course it would be okay, and they're completely open to having new people. But the only thing he said was and I asked him, would it be okay if I joined in? And he said definitely. And then he said, but I don't think they will talk. And just that, the fact that, why is it so difficult to just be comfortable with someone of the other gender? And it's just so stupid to think of all of these things that exist. And when I read Bad Feminist, it just put so many things into perspective for me. And I feel like there's all of these books like Bad Feminist, and of course there are so many, right? Or what these books do is that they put things into perspective. They force you to re-examine your life. They force you to look at things that you may have taken for granted, that you've been doing all your life, right? That you think is normal. They force you to look at normal and say, maybe this is not normal. Maybe this is something that I've just gotten used to. Maybe there is something that I can unlearn, and maybe there's a better way to do things, right? What is normal anyway? So yeah, that's what these books do. That's what Bad Feminist does. And besides gender roles and just the implications it has in relationships between men and women and people who don't identify as men and women, besides all of that, the book also talks about a lot of heavier topics like abortion rights, like rape and violence between men and women, and the violence that is inflicted on women by men. It talks a lot about how women are portrayed in media, in your television, and that really got me into thinking, what have I seen? What kind of representation have I seen on Indian TV, or rather on Hindi serials or Hindi television shows, reality shows, and all of that really it just it is kind of disturbing sometimes, but it's necessary. You have to re-examine it. You have to look at the way that you perceive certain things, and you have to ask questions. It is just so important to ask questions at any stage, at any point in your life. I remember this very funny thing, that when I was a kid, I had so many questions, and I would they would just keep popping in my head. And I had this tendency to just blurt them out the moment they came in my head. All of them. I would literally be asking questions every single hour, right? And I remember my mother saying this to me, that, there are too many questions, just make a book and write them down, and I will answer them and get them to me once you finish writing all of them down. And I remember having this book. I don't know where it is now, but I remember writing down a lot of these questions. And then at the end of the day or something, I would just go to my parents and ask them. And a lot of them, they were boggled by too, because it just seemed a little absurd, but they were important, and they recognized that it was important. And that's what we need to do as a whole, as a society. That's what we need to do as people. So yeah, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you had fun. I would really like to know your thoughts about these issues, these topics that we discuss. I would like to know what you think about gender and your experiences with your gender. How did you come to it? How did you realize you are what you are? And did you take time to examine your life? Did you take time to re-examine the way that you look at things? So yeah, and to our question, why do I think this story was told? But I think for this book, it would make sense if the question was, why do we think this book was written, right? I think this book was written because there's a lot of bad feminists out there. There's a lot of good feminists out there. There's a lot of feminists out there who need you to listen to their stories, who want you to listen to their stories. And I, for one, will listen to as many as I possibly can. And I think any person out there, whether you're female, not female, whether you don't identify with any gender, it's fine. Just listen to stories. And that's what we're doing here. We're telling you stories and we're listening to yours. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you had a good time, and we will see you next week.